Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Paul, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you, sir?
Good, Eric. I'm fine. Happy to be here.
Glad to hear it. So, why don't you do a quick intro, who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump right into the question from the last guest, as always, for those listening who know that already. And then I've got loads of questions for you. I think loads of applicable things to people that are either coaching, management, trying to find a new job, all of the above. And so I think it'll be a lot of good material for the people listening. So why don't you do a quick intro and then we'll hop right into it.
Yeah, sure. So what I'm known for most is I'm a writer. I've written 17 books. I write for HarperCollins and I write for the American Management Association. So anything relating to career or management or leadership, that's kind of my niche. So that part of it is easy. I spent 3 decades in the trenches of human resources. I worked as head of HR for Nickelodeon Animation. I was head of international human resources for Paramount Pictures. I've also worked in healthcare and biotech, as well as financial services. So between all that stuff, I've been a columnist for the Society for Human Resource Management. I've taught for years at UCLA in the Extension School of Business and Management. And that is me in a nutshell, 3 decades, bow on my head, ready to deliver whatever you need. You just tell me what you want to talk about, and I'm all ears and hopefully a little bit of mouth.
Sounds great. Love to hear it. So I think this question is actually quite fitting for you as you've touched a lot of different industries in your career. But the question is, if you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Oh, Lord, that is a great question. So I'm a musician. I played trumpet all through my years at UCLA. I think if I could be anyone, I'd want to be John Williams and be able to create the music for Steven Spielberg and everybody else. I mean, that's the person I'd like to be. I've always admired that so much. But in terms of, I guess to answer your question, it's either someone who's a guru in the AI space and has all the answers to that, which I don't think exists just yet, or actually it would be me, or at least the space that I'm in. The idea of people motivation, leadership development, performance management, getting people to give discretionary effort at work, have fun while you're doing it. It's actually the space I've always been most passionate about, what I've practiced, I'd like to think, and also what I write about. So I'm actually happy with the space that I'm in. I think that people leadership space is a good place to be.
Honestly, that's a great answer. Well, the first part is I also played trumpet all the way through high school and also love
Really?
John Williams. Yeah, yeah.
There you
So
go.
the John Williams soundtracks were when I was in high school and everyone had the iPods and stuff, I would have John Williams on, and then when somebody's like, "What are you listening to?" I'd quickly fast forward to whatever the newest song was. It's like
Right, right. Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's good. Great minds are thinking alike. So good for
Yeah,
you.
let's hope so.
Great.
And then the second part I think is really interesting because you've been able to make a career out of something that you're passionate about, and that's something that I try to talk about and emphasize on the podcast a lot is like, how do you find where's the cross section of stuff that you really like to do, something that you can make money at, and something that you're good at, and where do they all meet so to get the most life fulfillment? So I think for those listening, I think we'll be able to tease that out about how you manage to do that a little bit as we go. Um, so I want to start off with leadership specifically. I went to a lecture on Monday, and a lot of it was about leadership. And one of the things that was brought up often was the kind of intangible qualities of a leader. It's like you can point to somebody who is a leader who, like, you can say, yes, I'll listen to that guy and I'll follow that guy into battle, metaphorical battle, and or that lady or whoever. And oftentimes you can't really touch, like, or articulate exactly what that is. And so as you go into the workforce and people are in positions of management where they have authority, sometimes, those people are not necessarily the best leaders, or you have leaders that aren't in the position of authority. And I think it's just an interesting dynamic that I've seen is like, how do you actually develop leaders? Because there's leadership courses that I'm sure you've seen and go to where it's like, okay, yeah, I know the words that you're saying, but like to put it into practice and to really have somebody actually want to follow you as a leader is more difficult than just, oh, there's those 3 bullets on the slide. So as you've gone through your career and you've written about leadership and stuff, what are some of the things that you've found come like the sort of intangible things that are hard to articulate, but like what are some of those qualities that make a good leader, and how can those be developed? And I know there's a lot in there, but I just want to start the conversation there.
No, it's a great place to start. And I'm going to tell everybody it's easier than we're making it. We tell ourselves all these stories, these narratives in our heads about, to be a great leader, you have to be feared. Baloney. I'm not going to recognize my people and tell them they're doing a great job. They're going to want more money. They're going to want a promotion. Baloney. Make yourself the average bear. Okay, if you are on the receiving end of your message, how would it make you feel? It's just that level of increased self-awareness. All the books and all the everything, it just comes down to being yourself, but they call it authenticity. It's a matter of people know if what you're doing is really in their best interest versus your best interest. And what I've tried to teach in all my classes, I even taught this to my kids, it's like this idea of I want for you what you want for you, not I want for you what I want for me through you. There's a very, very big difference there. And so when you think of this idea of just being your authentic self, but there's a selflessness element to it. There was a white paper written in 1970, now 55 years ago, practically, called The Servant Leader. And it was written by John Greenleaf, who was a professor at the time. And it basically said, servant leaders put others' needs ahead of their own, and they serve, and their real interest is in helping others develop and grow, not just getting the work done every day. And it's a simple prism. It's a very, very simple prism, Eric, but it helps put everything in perspective. So you don't have to follow steps 1 through 33. But can I tell you real quick about an exercise I do at UCLA?
Yeah, yeah, of
When,
course.
when I teach in class there, and I do this also in my management training workshops, and I talk about, tell me about the best boss you've ever had. And, what made that person so? And, someone will raise their hands and say, well, most inspirational leader I ever had, she always had my back. She always made me feel like I should be confident about what I'm doing. She seemed to have more faith in me than I had in myself at the time. Good. Next student. Um, Most inspirational leader I've ever had, Paul. I think, really valued education and really talked to us about why that was so important. It was because of him. I went back and got my AA degree. I'll always be grateful for that. Third student raises their hand. It's someone who had a good sense of humor, kept things light, made me feel like I was included. It made me feel good about myself. Then the question goes, okay, you guys, I hear you. Now let me ask you a question. Are you really talking about that person's beingness or their doingness? What are you describing? Their beingness, who they are, or their doingness, what they did? Now I know it's both, but which one is the primary driver? And in my experience with my classes, the eyeballs go up to the left and they're thinking about it. And the first students start to raise their hands and they say, doing this, it's what the person did. It's what they did that made me feel good about myself. And I say, that makes sense. Keep talking. And they're talking about what they did and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, someone in the room says, wait a second, maybe it's their beingness. Maybe it's who they were that made them do the things they did. And to that, I say, bingo. There's no wrong answer here, but that tends to be a stronger answer. People respect your caring and they respect your character. Okay. They want to know about you, that you care about them. When they survey the Gen Z millennials, the Gen Y millennials, the Gen Z Zoomers, right? The millennials are 45 and under, Zoomers are 25 and under. They keep coming back with the same answers on these surveys. They want to work for an ethical company doing meaningful work for a management team that cares about them personally. That's not that hard to do. If you're a good listener and you truly care about people and you're a selfless leader, you put other people's needs ahead of your own. It's that servant leadership concept. And the idea is they want to feel that caring element, but it's also your character. Your character is, I trust my boss. I respect my boss. My boss's word is his or her bond. That's all this is. We're chasing our tails as a society with our hair on fire, trying to do all the time. But the answer is to be a great leader or to be a great parent or to be a great child or to be a great friend all comes from your beingness. And in that, I think we can all breathe in a collective exhaling because it's not as hard as we're making it. We've somehow lost the ability to sit around the campfire where the elders share wisdom with the younger generation. We're just too busy these days. We're looking at our iPhones. The truth of the matter is staff meetings and one-on-one meetings with your employees give you those chances to bond and touch someone else's heart. The real idea of when you talk about your favorite boss or your most inspirational leader, that's an emotional connection. It's not cognitive. It's not a matter of, well, you should have seen my boss and how well he did his job. That's not how they do it. It's their boss that they're in love with, who was the one who put their needs first, who made them feel good about themselves, helped them build their self-confidence, helped them learn their craft and master their trade. That's an element of beingness. Focus on character and caring. That's all it's going to take. And all the other books will be fine because they're all going to wrap up their theory under those two ideas anyway. Character and caring win the day, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that brought me to this thought bubble, which is actually quite funny, that shout out to Kathy for hooking us up. But I've had people that I know that seem to be doing all of the things that the books say, and you people will say their actions show that they care, but then underlying the beingness is like, mm, you know? And so that's kind of the crux of what I'm trying to get into, is how do you develop the beingness part? Because if let's say um let's just both put on the table that we think that human beings generally are good meaning and well meaning. So how do you develop the beingness part if you know that somebody wants the best for you, but there's that level of, right, there's the action, and then like you said, their underlying character and the things that motivate those things. How do you develop that part? Because that's the part that I think is very difficult for a book or a class or whatever to kind of develop, because it almost seems to me, at least in my experience anyways, that you have to look yourself in the mirror and do a lot of work on your own. And so to your point about um somebody saying, "Oh, this is the best boss I ever had," and they exhibited these qualities and these character traits, I feel like there has to be a lot of self-reflection, and in a way that, not that that would put the leadership courses out of business, but it's a different kind of development. Have you touched that, or like where in your books and your studies and your courses, like how do you incorporate that part into the classes and the books and stuff?
That's a great question. The career introspection is a big piece of this, right? As an executive coach, one of the first questions I ask someone is, would you want to work for you? Be
Ooh.
honest. And they're like, that noise you just made, that's the noise they make. They're like, well, well, come on, Paul, it depends. I'm busy, right? And they deflect. And another question along the same lines is, if the whole company followed your lead in terms of your behavior, your role model conduct, if the whole company followed your lead, would you be happy with where you took it? And those are not easy to answer. And when you're talking to people who've been behind the helm of owning the company or being a senior executive in a company, they've been doing it for decades. It takes a little bit of career introspection to kind of figure that out, Eric. And my goal is to just raise awareness. What a good coach does is, I don't tell you what to do. My assumption is the answers are within you. I'm just going to help ask the right questions to help ferret it out, so to speak, tease it out of you. The problem with the books, most books, is they tend to be very prescriptive. They teach you what? Okay, there are two steps to, or there are two kinds of sexual harassment: quid pro quo and hostile work environment, yada, yada, yada. Who cares? What you want is a book that teaches people how. It's not the what. They know the what. They just don't know how to do it. They don't know how to implement it. So a lot of my books historically, one of my books is called 101 Tough Conversations to Have with Employees. And my premise is simple. When you're delivering constructive feedback, right? When you're delivering tough feedback, do it in the other person's best interests. Frame it in terms of their career and their professional development. Don't make people feel judged. Don't use words like always, never. You always do this. You never do that. What were you thinking? You do that, people shut down. They go into total self-defense mode.
That's for
They're,
relationships as well, outside
that's
of
right.
work
It's
too.
all
Yeah.
relationship building too. And so what happens is, when they're in self-defense mode, they're assuming zero responsibility for a problem, and they're looking externally for the solution. It's someone else's fault. When you phrase it as a way and you say to someone, look, I want to, this is the proverbial bad attitude example. You don't ever want to tell someone they have a bad attitude, because those are fighting words. They're going to think, no, you got the bad attitude. They may not say it, but that's what they're thinking. But how do you do that? And you open a conversation with someone and you say, Paul, look, the most important decisions about your career are going to be made when you're not in the room. Okay, that's the same for you as it is for me, as it is for everyone else. There's something that may be missing awareness right now that may hold you back in the future when you're not in that proverbial room at that point to defend yourself. I want to talk to you about that if you're okay with that, because I think I can have your back going through this and helping you solidify this now so that it never holds you back for the rest of your career. Would that be okay? Now, most people are going to say that, sure, what's up? And then you can talk about there are occasions, there are times when I've seen that you can come across as, and now fill in the blank, confrontational, condescending, belittling, arrogant. I don't care what you say. You've set it up in a way that they're listening and it's in their best interest. And yet it's kind of like that soft tone, right? You got to have an iron hand, but a velvet glove. Being a good leader means not making people feel judged, not making them feel guilty. I don't want them to feel like they're the second grader who's being reprimanded in front of the whole class by the teacher. The rule is praise in public, censure in private. So if you've got good things to say about them, say it so everyone can hear it. But if you've got to give them that course corrective feedback, do that in private. But how you set it up is so important if you really want them to listen. And the filter is very simple. If you run into someone 20 years from now in the mall and they're going to say, OMG, Eric, how are you? I still think, what would Eric do? You influenced me so much. It's because of you that I was able to grow in my career. That's why we're doing all this stuff. We're not doing it for a paycheck. We're not doing it for the benefits. I know we have to, but the real gift, I always say leadership is the greatest gift the workplace has to offer because it allows you to touch people's lives and build their careers. It is quite a responsibility, but it's a beautiful responsibility when done right. And I'm not being pie in the sky about this. This has worked for me. I've not had a lot of turnover on my teams for my 30 years in corporate. I've had people who have gone on to do really, really good things in their careers and have thanked me for it years later. There's nothing that makes you feel better than knowing that you're growing more leaders. They always say leaders, successful leaders are not the ones with the most followers. They're the ones who grow the most leaders in turn. My job is to grow leaders. They think about Jack Welch when he was at General Electric. He made more CEOs for Fortune 500 companies than anybody in history. He was like a CEO making machine. I kind of want to be that. And not from a CEO standpoint, but just from giving people back to themselves and helping them be their best self when they're leading other people. It works. It really does. It's not that hard.
Yeah. I remember I was a team lead very early, very like green, and I had people that I was managing that had way more years of experience in the various fields. Like it wasn't one for one. It was me managing a group of like experts in their various things. And one of the things that I remember telling them when there was some thing that happened that wasn't good and I didn't know about it. And what I told them in our next like team meeting was I don't care if mistakes happen, but let me know so I can go to bat for you for to upper management. And then after that, when I moved on, whatever, somebody told me that I was one of the best team leads that they had had, and I was like, oh wow. And I remember, but I didn't know what I was doing, right? I like I'm a soccer coach, and so I wasn't really sure what kind of I was touching with that, if that makes sense, like what kind of chords I was touching. But then as I gained a few more years of experience, let's say. And then I've started listening to people like yourself and talks on leadership. It's like, oh, that's what I was touching. They felt like I had their back regardless of whatever. And that can do more for a person than a lot of things, right? That feeling that they get of my boss or team leader or whatever has my back. And then in return, selfishly, then often they'll go further lengths for you and the team performs better and more cohesive as a whole because that culture is created. Um, I want to jump off that to you mentioned staff meetings and things of that nature. I'm sure you've also seen this where people say, well, the book says have a staff meeting a week, and you go into that staff meeting and no one wants to talk and no one wants to say anything, or people are dialed in from wherever, and it's kind of like, oh, why do we have to do this every week type situation. How do you um foster, right? I know we talked a lot of the reasons before, but how would you foster that sort of environment to like let's say you're a new leader coming onto a new team. Like how would you foster that environment to where the team before or the team that's there is kind of yeah, we don't really want to do that. How do you bring them on side?
Yeah, great question. You got to reinvent staff meetings. Staff meetings are critical. I mean, as an HR guy, when I would go to a new company and I'd introduce myself to the various department heads, one of my questions was, you know, how often do you meet for staff meetings and the like? And if they're answer, oh, we don't do staff meetings. We've been working together for years around here, so we don't need to have them. Bingo, red flag. That told me there was going to be problems in that unit because the pace of business changes so quickly these days. I mean, theoretically, you could have daily huddles. Forget about weekly staff meetings. There's so much stuff going on, and we're moving so quickly. There's that expression that we're building the plane while we're flying it, right? And that's what it feels like for a lot of people. But with the one of my books that came out last September was called The First Time Manager Leading Through Crisis. And it's all because of coming out of COVID, while we're in this COVID reintegration phase, there's so many challenges with individuals, with teams, with companies. How do you kind of gear up for that? How do you get ready for that kind of stuff? It's not easy. And they don't teach this in the corporate classroom. And even if you have an MBA from a top 10 school, they don't teach leadership in the trenches. They talk about organizational design and organizational behavior. I mean, that's fine. It's theoretical 30,000-foot stuff, but I need to know what to do from a leadership standpoint in the trenches. So to answer your question specifically, staff meetings are important because you need a touch base where everyone can be grounded, everyone's hearing the same message from the same people. And weekly is probably as ideally as it's going to get unless you want to do daily huddles, but most people don't do that. So that's fine. But the weekly, at most bi-weekly, every other week, that's about as far as I would ever go without keeping my team in tune. That's number one. Number two, as the leader of the group, I can give an update of everything that I know so that everyone's on the same page and they can ask questions. But that's only part of it. I also need everyone to give an update in terms of what they're doing, talking about their projects, talking about any roadblocks they foresee happening, talking about celebrations if they've completed something that was a project that they had and we had a happy ending. I want to give people reason to celebrate, but everyone needs to talk. It's not a manager, one talking head giving all the information and boom, the staff meeting is over. People need to talk. That socialization piece is very, very important. The other thing to keep in mind is there are a lot of people out there who think, I'm the only one who does any work around here. I don't know what everyone else is doing, but I'm the only one doing it. Interestingly enough, when they start hearing from their peers about all the different things they're working on, that entitlement mentality starts to subside because they realize they're not the only ones that are doing all the work. So having a weekly staff meeting is important. Now, in a remote environment, it's a little trickier because people are all on a Zoom or on whatever. And I'll tell them, it's like, look, you guys, I want us all tuned in. I don't want you just planning for your little mini presentation. And then when you're done, you can go dark on us. We won't see you anymore. And I'm going to assume you're off doing some other work. That doesn't happen. I need eyeballs on these calls. Eyeballs, all of yours at the same time, unless there's an emergency. That's rule number one. Rule number two is I will call on you sporadically to say, Ryan, what do you think about what Sarah just said? What are your thoughts about that? So you better be listening. I don't want to hear anyone saying, well, could Sarah just repeat what she just said? That's not going to work for me. So I need to make sure that they're fully engaged and they're staying connected and they're really listening to what their peers have to say. The final thought for me is it's not a matter of you do your little stand-up routine for 3 minutes and tell everyone what you're working on and you're done. I need you commenting. I need you asking questions to other people. I want to make sure that this is as good as possible as far as if we were sitting around the campfire in person, it's the same experience. The only difference is we're doing it via video conference, but I want it to feel that real. That to me is important. You set those expectations, that's what happens. If you set no expectations, they're going to go into the bad habits. And if you're forcing them to talk, they'll prepare a little 3-minute blurb, but then that's it. They're going to go off video, so you can't see them anymore. And they're going to start texting someone and they're not listening anymore. And that won't happen. I can't have that happen. That would drive me bananas. I would go crazy in a situation like that. So understand the value of the staff meetings. Understand that most managers haven't been trained on how to make them really, really effective. And to the degree that you're comfortable, if you're not in the management seat yet, maybe you can suggest some things to your boss or to the team about how we might want to reinvent this so that all of us have a chance to talk, all of us have a chance to ask questions of one another and that sort of thing. So just some food for thought. But the final thing there is make sure you make room for celebration. When people are achieving their goals and their projects are coming to completion, that's a celebration. It doesn't mean you have to have party hats and alcohol, but it's just calling that person out and saying, congratulations, Ryan, that's wonderful. Tell us all about it. Can you give us a quick overview? And what did you learn from it? What can we learn from it? Give them a chance to have their moment in the sun. That's the psychic income. It's free. It makes people thrive. It makes their, they sit up in their chair, their shoulders go up. There's a pride element there. Don't miss that opportunity. Don't miss that window.
Yeah, that makes total sense as well. Speaking of new managers, sometimes and you'll have somebody who's very good at what they do. I can speak from experience in like the engineering field where you'll have a very, very good engineer who then gets promoted into a management role, and then they're doing less of engineering work and more managing role, and they don't like managing. They would rather be touching the math or the system design or the whatever. Um, how as a organization, I don't know if organization is the right kind of framework to look at it from, but how do you deal with that sort of situation where you've got somebody who's really good at what they're doing and they are next in line for the promotion, let's say, but really they should be doing engineering because that's really what they're good at and that's their thing. You just using engineering as the example, but I feel like you see this in multiple industries as well. I'm sure, do you know the situation I'm referring to? So how would you deal with that as an organization, but then also just your own thoughts as well?
That, Ryan, is an excellent question. So stay with me. It's not just the engineers. It's anyone who's trained in a discipline where you are focused to be good at it yourself.
Yep.
Think doctors, think lawyers, think
Yes.
accountants, think engineers. Their success has always been what they've been able to do individually. And all of a sudden you're like, well, congratulations, you now have a team of 4. And they're like, uh-huh. And that's it. And sink or swim and figure it out. And the companies are missing a window there. You do need to have that kind of training because they do have to understand there's an expression, what got you here won't get you there. What made you successful as an individual contributor is not necessarily going to make you successful as a manager. As a matter of fact, it might be counter towards being a good leader. Because here's what happens. And when you talk about this idea of, oh, I've got a boss who's a micromanager and I hate this, I hate working for her, blah, 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 all the drama kicks in. The reality is this: what made you a successful individual contributor was control. You had control of everything in your world. You can answer a question about anything on your desk or anything, that was within your realm of responsibility. Because you had that sense of control, you had a sense of self-confidence. Okay, fine. That makes sense. Now I have 4 people. These 4 people started working for me on Monday. Interesting. Well, now I'm going to be judged by 4 people. And if one of them messes up, it's going to look bad on me. Therefore, I must uber control everything they're doing. So you're taking the individual contributor mindset that made you successful, and now you're just mapping it on to being a team lead. But that doesn't make sense because now it's going to be like, I've seen managers who say, no one is allowed to send out an email from this department that I'm not copied on. They're trying to control the message. They're trying to control how everything gets done, every aspect of every element of the work their people are doing. Well, number one, you're going to drive your people crazy because nobody wants to work for that. And number two, you can't scale your career. If you're having this much trouble managing 4, I'm not giving you 40, and you can forget about 400. So I need managers who are in first-time roles to start thinking bigger picture. How do you scale your career? So one of the things you want to do is you want to sit around the campfire, the staff meeting, and you want to talk to your employees about what made you successful and what's making them successful, compare notes, and figure out and agree on what everyone's expectations are moving forward. That will let you sleep better at night. And it won't make you feel like you have to control every aspect. Now, you still have the right to say, no finished product leaves the department without my approving it. That's legit. I could totally understand that. But you don't want to, successful leadership is setting people up for success and then stepping out of the way. You got to let them find their own traction, find their own way of doing it, just like you did. But again, there's a balance in there. And that balance comes from number one, making sure that they know what your expectations are, making sure that your team is in alignment so that you're all talking about these things in terms of how to approach these situations. And then basically giving them their space to do so. That's what coaching leadership is about, or mentoring leadership. You don't want to be a disciplinarian. You don't want to be the unilateral decision maker and disciplinarian who's basically telling people what to do under all sorts. That's 100 years old. when Henry Ford automobiles were coming off the conveyor belt, the manager, quote unquote, had all the answers. And the employees on the line had questions. They went to the manager gave them the answer. That's not what it is today. Today, these are knowledge workers. They know more about the job than you do. They know more about the customers than you do, and they know more about the systems than you do. So as a manager, you can't control to that level, but you can set your expectations clearly, and you can create the culture where people feel like you're going to have their backs. I'm not saying that they make stupid mistakes and do haphazard things, but I also want my people to make healthy mistakes. Healthy mistakes mean they're pushing the rubber band. To your point earlier, Eric, I don't want any surprises. I always tell my people I don't do drama. If something's going to hit the fan, you need to let me know first because I don't want to hear it from someone outside the department. You guys, that's only fair, right? And they're like, yeah, Paul. Okay, so they get that. But the reality is, if you can set up the expectations and they know where they need to deliver, they'll find their way of doing it. And they'll make you more of the mentor and the coach because they're not afraid of you. You make them afraid, you're going to have a compliance mindset. They will do only so much just to make sure that they don't make a mistake. If you set them up with self-confidence and you want to you want creativity, you want innovation, you want new ideas, you'll get it. But it's only to the degree that they feel comfortable with you as their leader, making themselves a little bit vulnerable, making themselves a little bit risky. So the balance in there is talking about it. That's what staff meetings are for. That's what the one-on-one meetings are for. You get to hone that muscle. Leadership is a muscle that you're building. It's an awareness level. It's fun. It's cool. When you see people thriving under your leadership, there's not a better feeling than that. But again, Eric, a lot of people never make the mindset break from being an individual contributor. And 20 years later, they're doing the same thing. They say, I've been managing for 20 years. And I'm thinking to myself, you've been managing for 1 year. You just repeated it 20 times. But you didn't really learn. You didn't progress in your career because you're not studying leadership. Leadership is a muscle you need to build because that's what's going to get you into the C-suite one day or to the head of the department role or head of a division. If you're happy doing what you're doing as an individual contributor, God bless you. That's fine. You don't have to move into leadership and management. But many people want to. And if you do, you have to know how to make that mindset break. So,
Yeah. Is it from an organizational standpoint, is there any value in having, well, or what would the situation be where you've got that person who's the individual contributor and maybe somebody else becomes, so they stay on, maybe we'll call it the technical track, and then somebody else goes into from an organizational perspective. Do you see a lot of organizations do that where they've got people that are experts in whatever they're doing and they're not even considered for leadership because they don't want to be or whatever the case may be is, but they still have a structure in terms of um like HR pay band promotional structure where it's like, okay, well, you're not a manager, but we're still going to give you this promotion because you are the absolute expert in whatever system that we're selling and things like that. From an organizational perspective, do you see that a lot as well? And what is maybe the optimal way to go about doing that sort of system and then filtering people out, one who want to go to leadership and one who want to go to the technical and sorting that out from the bottom piece?
that is, again, an excellent question. I'm very impressed with your questions. Good. Okay, so stay with me for a minute. The way the system is rigged, so to speak, is if you really want to get more clout in the company and you want to make more money, you got to move into management ultimately, right?
Yeah.
You can say, I supervise 20 people and I make X amount of money, whereas the people who are on my team only make X amount of money, right? And they may not manage anybody. So the system is rigged that everyone gets pushed up unless it depends on the company. Like in Coca-Cola, if you work for Coca-Cola in Atlanta and you're the food scientist, the food chemist who knows what the formula is, you don't need to manage anybody. You are a C-level person by definition because you are critical to the success of that organization, right? So now you look at it, the statistics will tell you that about 1 in 5 people who are in management wish they could go back to being an individual contributor. They just don't like people. They don't like working with people. And I get that too. But of course, then they say, well, I can't go back because then I'd have to give up my title and I'd have to take cut and pay, and I can't do that. So they stay in management begrudgingly. The answer to your question is we're not a good system for that. In our business world, we don't have paths of individual contributor C-level people, except in maybe, like I say, Coca-Cola would. But those examples are exceptions. You're not going to see much of that. Usually you have to grow from being an individual contributor to being a leader. That's the model that we know. So how can a company do better? Pick an engineering company and say, if you're the golden engineer when it comes to flight science or whatever, we don't need you to manage anyone. We're going to make you a vice president, or we're going to make you a senior vice president just because of your knowledge level. That can happen in certain environments, but it's rare. It's more the exception. So I'd like to say that companies will focus on getting better at that so that people who really are good on the tech side could just do what they do best. That's that whole term of a Peter principle, right? The Peter principle means he's petered out. He's gone as far as he can go because he's reached his level of incompetence. But why should people have to reach a level of incompetence if they're really competent at something? Why can't we award them? Well, again, look at the competition. When you're looking at all the other engineering companies, how many people are out there in engineering that are vice presidents and senior vice presidents that don't manage anybody? And the answer is going to be not many. That's not the way our system is built. So therefore, if no one else is doing it, I'm not going to do it in my company. There's your logic. They just follow what everyone else is doing. That lemming principle is alive and well in humanity, not just in corporate America. They're all like that. They always look to see where their competitors are. You can't even do a salary survey for someone who's a senior vice president of engineering who doesn't necessarily manage anyone. Now, it can be, don't get me wrong, depending on the company, it can happen. But I'll stay with my point that in most industries in corporate America, moving into management is the next step for more money and more clout and higher titles. If that's what we have to live in and work under, then you, again, your career introspection as an individual is, what do I want to do? If I really, really, really don't want to manage other people and I want to stay an individual contributor and I work in a company where they don't have an unlimited potential of money and titles for individual contributors, do I stay here where I'm comfortable or do I force myself into the management piece? And my answer is, if you know that 1 in 5 people who are in management wish that they were not in management and they could go back to being an individual contributor, should you stay where you are right now? And that is a focus of, or that's a factor of how much you want to manage, how much you want to stay on your own. Do you feel like there's a shame element in remaining an individual contributor? Do you feel like, oh, my company, my family would be so proud of me if I move into management? All of that stuff goes into the mix when you're trying to figure this stuff out in terms of your career development. What I will tell you is this: my best advice after 3 decades of doing corporate is do what your heart tells you. So much of this stuff is easier than we make it. Stop telling yourself all these narratives about, well, I must be in management to make more money and have a bigger title. Even though I hate people, that's kind of silly. Maybe down the road you'll want to do it, but if it's not where you are right now, don't force yourself to do things that you don't want to do. The reciprocal of this is I tell managers, don't spend all your time managing to the most problematic employees. Okay, you need to be spending most of your time on the top performing employees and those that are in the middle of the pack, right? But don't spend all your time trying to shore up people's weaknesses. You will get a much better return on investment by building on people's strengths. So that's my wisdom to the people who are in management. To the people who are considering going into management, stay with what your heart is telling you. If you love the tech side, you want to stay close to the work. You don't want to be removed from that line operational responsibility by having to manage others who are doing that work. Stay right where you are. If that changes at some point in the future, good. Then move with it in that direction at that point. But if right now what your heart is telling you is, I want to be closer to the work, I love the tech, I love the hands on, stay there. Don't necessarily move away from there because that could pull you away from the stuff that you're most passionate about.
Yeah, software developer friends that might be listening, that's for you. Um, the thing that you said about the way the system works is when people go into management, they're managing people, they get paid more. I sometimes I'll have this discussion with people about, well, why do CEOs make so much? I'm like, do you know how hard it is to manage like 10 people, let alone an entire company and all of the functions of the company and like all of the, it's like, it's hard, man. Not that all CEOs should get paid exactly what they're making, but like it's hard. It's very difficult. And the ones who are very good at it, going back to kind of the intangible piece that we were talking about before, it's almost like you are compensating that person for all the introspective work that they've done. That's very hard to do. You have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, this part about me sucks, and that part about me sucks, and that part about me sucks, and I have to get rid of those pieces and do that. And that, like, that's hard because well, it's hard. And so it's almost like you're compensating people for doing that work and then becoming that sort of leader where they have the capability to lead that many people and that level of this branch of the company is doing this thing, and if that doesn't work then this part is going to be affected, and then what do we got to do with all those people, and then it's a whole thing that is like the capabilities of an individual to manage that is like it's mind-boggling, to be completely honest. um okay, I want to jump into, well, this has been great so far. I want to jump into interview stuff a little bit, and then kind of into what you are up to now. And then, do you have a hard stop?
No, no, I'm okay for now. I'm good.
Okay. So I want to jump into some interview stuff. I know people coming right out of college often get a little bit nervous first interviews in the corporate world. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but then also on the if you are interviewing somebody, um, things that are good and not so good. So let's start with the you are being interviewed portion. How to nail the interview, let's say. What are some of the things that you found? What are some of the things that you as the interviewer would be looking for? And kind of what's some of the guidance that you give to people going into those sorts of situations?
Big question, but it's okay. Okay, so let's stay with that.
There's a lot
First
of
one,
it, yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. Well, rule number one is don't overthink this. Okay, don't over-engineer it. It's you're going in for an interview. Okay, not life or death, but you want to put your best foot forward. Got it. Okay, rule number two, law of large numbers. Don't pin all your hopes on one interview as much as I always wanted to work for that company. Look, don't you guys, because you don't know what's going on. That you can't guarantee yourself. Don't fall in love with one idea. Law of large numbers means you're going to send out your resume buckshot. You're going to apply to a lot of jobs. Don't just click on the one click to apply. Don't do that if you're not qualified for the job. That's a waste of everybody's time. But the truth of the matter is, if you've got 40 leads out there, it's better than four. And that's certainly better than one. So the degree that you can scour what's going on out there, go to Indeed.com and make sure you set it up so that it's sending you job openings that fit your qualifications. You can do the same thing on LinkedIn. Get those search engines working to feed you information once a day or once a week, however you want to do that. But that is a tool that's available to you. Okay. But again, think big numbers. Think buckshot. Once you're down to 3 or 4 companies, then you can start thinking rifle shot, right? Then you're thinking specifically, but don't get too crazy about any one thing. Just send your resume out there and talk to people. So that's a big rule for me. The next thing is do your homework before you go in, even if it's an hourly job. If you haven't spent a few minutes on their website trying to look basically at what do they do? How many employees do they have? Can you see what their revenue is? What clients do they serve? Which niche markets are they in? If you can't explain that company for at least 3 to 5 sentences, you kind of don't deserve to get the job. I hate to tell you, I've seen candidates who come in who are totally unprepared. And then when I ask them if they have any questions, they're like, well, what year were you founded? And I'm like, seriously? That's fodder. You're just asking a question. You could have found that out 2 minutes. A Google search will tell you what year we were founded. How many employees do you have? Are you public or private? Those are not things you want to ask an interviewer. You want to ask high yield questions, questions that will make a difference. So do a little homework on that. While we're on it, Eric, one thing, go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Everyone should spend time here. They do not teach this. It's called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And where you would find it is BLS, like Bureau of Labor Statistics, .gov/OOH for Occupational Outlook Handbook. And that looks at payroll numbers, basically, is what it's doing. The government puts it together with a 10-year look forward. So right now, I think it's from 2022 to 2032. Next year, it'll be 2023 to 2024. It lags a couple of years, right? But the bottom line is they're looking at these payroll projections. So what it does is it tells you benchmark jobs, individual contributor jobs versus management jobs. What does it take to get them? What kind of education? What's your first life? What's your experience going to need to be to qualify? What is it like working there? Then it has salary projections. Then it tells you job projections. So if you're in HR, you click on the little spreadsheet and it'll show you, for example, that the average job will grow, pick a number, 10% over the next 10 years. The average job in corporate America will be growing 7%. That's interesting. It's good to know. So HR is growing a little bit faster than normal. But then you click on the spreadsheet and it'll take you from plus 40% to minus 40%, which basically says if you want to do HR in healthcare and biotech, that's going to be up 40%. You want to do HR in the post office, it's minus 40%. If you want to do HR in traditional publishing, it's minus 30%. But if you can do it in digital publishing, it's up 25%. And all of a sudden, you're starting to see, wait a second, this is the hidden job market. This is where the industries that are really growing, this is where I want to kind of focus myself. Because there's three levels, right? There's the job, the company, and the industry. Historically, industry got short shrift. Nobody talked about the industry. It's like, what job do you have? What company do you work for? What I'm telling you guys is just more important now than ever. The industry is the 800-pound gorilla. Because when you're looking at software and biotech and high tech and different kinds, those are going through the roof. And with all due respect, I come out of entertainment. Movie studios, record labels, they're all shrinking very, very quickly. And they're conglomerating. Fox no longer exists. It's part of Disney. Paramount's on the selling block right now. I'm not saying you can't go into those industries. I'm not saying you shouldn't do HR in the post office. But what I am saying is, if there's a projected minus 30% growth path over the next 10 years, just expect you may be laid off, or you may not have a lot of opportunities to promote in those kinds of environments. So be strategic about this and share that in your interview. To the degree that you can say, I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook and I found that this industry is really growing. The employers are going to be like, you looked at what? Tell me what that is again. And then they're going to write it down. And now you're telling them the stuff where they can find out information. It's called informed candidacy. It's people who are informed about what's going on. They're not a cork on the wave, bobbing about, seeing who's going to hire them. They're deliberate, they're purposeful, they're intentional in their job search. Those are the ones who are always going to come out ahead. You build your goals around that and you share that with an employer, you're going to go straight to the front of the line. So that's the pre-process. You want me to continue about the interviewing?
Yeah, please.
All right, so stay with me on this too. There's a million books out there on how to interview. If the employer asks this is a good response, right? QA, QA, QA. And by the end of that tennis match, they don't know anything more about you. You don't know anything more about them. And even if you do get the job offer, you still don't really know what you're getting. It's important that you're asking questions during the interview. I'll start with that, but not filler questions, not questions that you can tell from your research, like what year was your company founded. Just ask them questions that are cool questions. Tell me about yourself if you wouldn't mind. I did take a quick look at LinkedIn, if you don't mind. I see that you've been here for 7 years, but what made you initially, join the company? What initially attracted you to the firm? That's a great question. Or, we've been talking about the primary duties of the job. I understand that, but what are maybe some of the secondary duties, things that'll pop up once a quarter or twice a year? What can I expect along those lines? That's a good question. Tell me about the culture. What's important to you in terms of your expectations from staff members and being good team players and that sort of thing? And what's it like working around here? That's a good question. There are good questions that you can ask that are meaningful that you can't get off the internet. That's a smart thing to do. Now, let me give you the flip side. What I'm telling employers to do is don't start an interview with a formal QA. Oh, Eric, tell me about yourself. Well, good. Well, what's your greatest strength? What's your greatest weakness? Tell me about your favorite job. Don't do that yet. The relationship isn't ready for that yet. What I want you to do is spend 5 minutes talking to the person as a human being. Ask them questions about what's important to them at this point in their career. What brought them to this interview? Or if you had 2 or 3 criteria in selecting your next company or industry or whatever, what's important to you right now? Or even towards the end of the interview process, I would say to people, before we extend an offer, I'd say, look, you've met the players, you know the job. I've got to ask you a really, really important question. If you were to accept this position with our company, how would you explain it to a prospective employer 3 to 5 years from now? In other words, like what do you see that narrative being? Like, why would this be a good move in career progression? How is this going to help you move forward in your career? That's the most important question in the process. And if they can tell me, no, Paul, I really want to work here because A, B, C, D, yep, boom, that's a candidate I'm going to hire. If they're still looking at me like, I don't know, I'm not sure. Like I'll get a payroll check and benefits. Out you go. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? It's almost like just be cool. Just put yourself on the receiving end of this. If you were interviewing someone for the job you're about to go for, what questions would you ask them? And what kind of responses would you want to give them? And even if they're a little formal and they're a little at length, and you can tell they're not comfortable interviewing because a lot of managers hate interviewing, they're uncomfortable, they're sitting with a stranger, they don't know how to, they're not good dialogue people. They make them as comfortable as you can. And if there's awkward moments of silence, Eric, can I expand on that a little bit? Or is there anything else I can share with you along those lines? Doing that makes them feel at ease. Just because they're the ones who are in the hiring seat doesn't mean they're very comfortable in this process. So be kind. Don't rush to judgment that they know what they're doing. They don't necessarily know what they're doing. There's not a lot of training out there that happens in that sense. And maybe, give me an example of a time when you had a big challenge. I hate those questions, but we're going to get them. So the
Yeah.
reality becomes, if they're going to use what they call behavioral interview questions, I always tell managers, don't use those as a lead in, because a lead in, give me an example of a time when, doesn't mean anything. It's like the candidate's going to make something up. Use it as a follow-on question. Paul, let me ask you this. You've been in HR now for 20 years. What do you dislike most about your job? Oh, obviously having to fire people. That's the worst of it. That's nothing lousier than that. Yeah, me too. I get it. Well, tell me about a time when that happened. What's the most recent one that comes to mind? Tell me a little, put some
Mm.
meat on the bones. Tell me about that. That's how you use it. A behavioral question should be used as a follow-on question, not as a lead-in. And I have seen people who have 20 lead-in questions. Give me an example of this. Give me an example of that. Give me an example of the other. And as a candidate, you're like, I don't know. So you end up making stuff up. All I'm saying is be prepared for all of it. But in the back of your mind, try and make that person comfortable. If you can tell that they're at ease, they're ill at ease, they're not in a good place, to the degree that you can extend that warmth and just say, I'm happy to answer that question. And, you know, pull them in because they're not necessarily good at it. And it's going to make you feel better too, because when you're giving away something, you feel better about yourself than when you're trying to take something. So give it away. And it's just a natural way of looking at things. It's a little bit kinder, it's a little bit more selfless, but it'll help you calm your nerves as well. Because it's really a dual relationship that you're trying to establish. Not just will they hire me, but what I can do for them and how I'm going to build my career by joining them. So it's like, let me make sure I can build a relationship with this interviewer because this is probably going to be my manager, and I want to make sure I get along with the person.
Yeah, I think that's great advice that to make it into a mini, well, it won't be a mini relationship if you get hired eventually, but to turn it into a mini relationship, it just makes everybody more comfortable. I think also for some of the people listening that maybe have only done one or two interviews or looking for first or second jobs or whatever, the point about sometimes the person interviewing you might not know exactly what they're doing either is also very important because speaking from my own experience, like the first couple of times I went in to interview, it's like this person has been working in the world and I'm a college kid and they must know everything or like, well, close to everything or whatever it was that I thought. And then like fast forward and you realize like if I reflected on some of those, I was like, oh, that was a weird question. And I remember it being weird at the time, but I was like, oh, I guess this is just how it is. And that's not actually what the case is. It's maybe they just weren't prepared for that. And then I, as the person being interviewed, also has to be prepared for whatever questions that they might throw. And so it's like, but treating it after a while, I just started to treat it as a conversation instead of this big daunting thing like, oh, I need a job.
Right.
And instead, it's just like, oh, I'm going to meet a person and we're going to talk about some things that I can do. And I'm going to ask them about some things that they're doing with their company. And then we'll see how it goes. And once I did that, people are always asking me how much I prepared for interviews. And to your point, I would Google a company and figure out what they were doing, but that doesn't take very long. And aside from that, I was like, I don't really prepare. I just go and I'm prepared because I've lived the life that they're going to ask me about, so I already know it. And then I just have a couple things that I want to know, and some of the questions will pop up by some of the questions that they ask me. If they ask me, give me a time that you had to deal with a difficult customer. I'm like, oh, do you guys have a difficult customer? How do you guys handle that? And then you can flip it and you can go back and forth and have a dialogue, and it kind of turning it into a conversation makes like the nerves, like you said, just go kind of go away a little bit after that. Um, okay. All of this so far, great advice. I want to jump into though what you're up to now because I'm interested in that as well. So let's see where's a good place to start. Let's start with how you became interested in HR, and then maybe we can not gloss over all the things that you did, but I do want to get to your consulting business and the books and stuff as well. So let's start with how you like when you were little, were you interested in people? Was that something that was always interesting to you? Did you coach? Was that something that was interesting to you, or was it ever, oh, I want to be a band teacher or something like that? Or like how did you end up being HR is the thing?
I have no idea. Here's the thing that makes life interesting for all of us. I didn't even know what HR was when I was young. Going through college, I didn't barely know what HR was, and it was a department we had on campus. Whether you're military transitioning to the private sector, first job post high school, first job post college, understand that there's an element of randomness in this that's going to lead you in a direction that you need to go. Even if it's a matter of just kissing frogs before you find the prince, your first job in the private sector, like for military people, is probably not going to be the one that you stay with for 30 years. And we also know nobody stays for 30 years anymore. That doesn't really exist much because companies go through so much change themselves. But for me, just real quickly, so I ended up being the first one in my family to go to college. I came from Italian immigrant kind of family. My uncle was in World War II, would tell me the great stories about working in under General Patton, and he was at the Battle of the Bulge. I went to high school in Manhattan. They offered German. I took German. I went to UCLA. I majored in German. I stayed on for my master's degree. Decided not to go for the PhD. But okay, now I'm 24 years old, got a master's in German. What am I going to do? Hmm. So bottom line is I went to an employment agency and I said, can you guys help me find a job? Because I'm like clueless. And they said, well, how about you work here? And I said, oh, that's interesting. What do I do? Well, you see the yellow pages right there and you see that phone? You make cold calls and you reach out and you find candidates for companies and you find new companies who need our services. The headhunting business, the recruiting firm. Uh, I did that for 6 years. I was good at it. They made me the director of training, sales training. So I became that. But over time, I got to a point where I realized I want to do more than this. I'm selling to HR people. I want to be paid for what's in my head, not just how many sales I can make in a particular month. I want to get into HR. So I took a 2-year program, got a certificate in human resources. Through that networking, I went inside with a client and then I started in HR. So that's how I got there, which is very backdoor. And it took me 6 years longer than it probably should have. But the reality was, this is the late 80s and early 90s. The bombs were dropping in Iraq for the first time, massive recession. There was a lot going on, and I couldn't find a job. So that happens. So be patient. That's a really, really important lesson here. Just be patient when it comes to career stuff. When I got into HR, though, I was good. I started in a small company with about 200 people. We grew in 2 years to 700 people, and I was the one heading recruiting. So we were opening up gateway cities all over the country. It was a mortgage banking company. But someone I had met at UCLA was the head of human resources for City of Hope, which is a great cancer research hospital here in Southern California. And she called me up one day and she said, I know you're good at training. Would you come in and train our managers? I want you to. And I said, well, it might be a conflict of interest. I don't know if I'm allowed to train another company. And she said, well, find out if you can. And lo and behold, they allowed me to do it. So it was good. I didn't know I was on an audition. She wanted me to meet the whole management team. They really liked the training. Afterwards, she said, they loved you. I want to interview for a job. I said, what? She said, Director of Employee and Labor Relations. I said, I've never done employee and labor relations before. I've only done recruitment. And she said, yeah, the unions will teach you everything you need to know. And she was right. They did. I got bloodied pretty badly, but she knew that I was good. And it was like she took a chance on me, which I really appreciated. Did that for about 3 years. Opportunity came up at Paramount Pictures. And I said to the head of human resources, I don't have entertainment experience. And she said, yeah, but you've worked in City of Hope. You've worked with doctors, PhD MDs. I said, yeah. She said, so does my sister. My sister works at Cedars. If you can work with those kind of people, you can work with directors and producers here. That got me into Viacom, which is the parent company, and I was there for 10 years. I was head of international. I moved into international HR with Paramount. Then I became the head of HR for Nickelodeon. Don't ask. I mean, I look back and I think what was always important to me, it's funny for me, actually, Eric, I wanted to make sure that I worked for name brand companies because I knew one day I'd want to be a consultant. I never knew when it was going to be, but I thought I want to have good names on my company, on my resume, on my LinkedIn profile, so people can see that. But I also worked for smaller companies. I've done a mix of things over 30 years. In 2022, I decided to go out on my own and I wanted to focus on what I love doing, which is teaching. So for me, the teaching finds itself in the form of, management training, going into companies and doing that kind of stuff. I still write. I've been a columnist for SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, for years. My 17th book just came out 2 weeks ago. So I'm still writing with HarperCollins and that kind of stuff. Teaching at UCLA, also down at UC San Diego for their extension program. I do a lot of things. And to me, it's like, yeah, I was nervous about opening my own firm because it's hard to go from a paycheck with benefits to zero and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to survive. But the timing is right. Our kids were off the payroll. They're older now, those kinds of things. We didn't have a lot of debt. So we were in good shape financially. So we can do it. But I actually had 30 years of preparing for this. So I was lucky. And I had a good network. And people right away said, well, if you're available to do that, why don't you come in my company and do some management training because our managers really need it. So today it's three things for me. It's the management training, it's keynote speaking because I like speaking at conferences, and it's executive coaching. I got certified as an executive coach, but that's also just a form of teaching. It's just one-on-one teaching as opposed to team teaching. So basically that's my role these days and I'm loving it. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, I mean, the journey is, I can imagine once you get to the point where you're going to start consulting after you've already got somebody say, "Hey, come give management training," and actually it's an audition, and then the next person does it, and the next person does it. It's like it makes sense. There's a little bit of security to take that leap. When did you know that you were like what determines if you're good at HR? Like what I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but at some point, when you go through a career in an industry, you acquire skills and you're good at, for software engineering, you learn this coding language and you've coded on this project, or if you're managing a program, you've managed a program that's done XYZ projects and they built that building and that building is worth whatever amount of money and you can kind of put those things out there on the resume. If you're doing headhunting and you're recruiting and then this management training, like when did you know that you were, well, I'm very good at this, like the people side, but also it seems a little bit as you told the story, like, oh, well, I'm not qualified because I've never worked in entertainment, or I'm not qualified because I've only done recruiting. There seems to be, um, did you ever know that you were good at this? Like that first management training, you had no idea it was an audition. So, but at some point though, you would have figured it out to the point where I'm going to now be a consultant and this is all I'm going to do is teach other people how to be good at this. So like where did that happen for you and what constitutes like if you were to look at somebody else and be like that person's great at HR, like what does that mean?
Eric Jennings, you are an excellent interviewer.
Thank you.
You're really good. You asked really, really well thought out questions. Okay, so a couple thoughts. I knew I liked it because as I was getting to know the clients when I was on the search side, I really liked what they were doing. I was interested in what they were doing. And eventually I knew I wanted to do more than just the recruitment piece. Some people stay in recruitment their whole lives. Nothing wrong with that. But again, like I said, I wanted a corporate job. I wanted to work for a bigger company. It was a smaller boutique recruitment firm. I wanted more. And so I went to school and I went to UCLA Extension and I got my certification. I eventually went back and taught there, but it was 2 years. It was a 2 year commitment, 8 or 9 courses. I don't remember, but 12-week courses. I mean, it was a lot. And you do it. It's not a walk in the park, but you do it because you want to learn it. As you're learning more of it, you're developing a level of self-confidence. The funny thing is, to answer your question, what makes you more self-confident as you get older is you've seen everything. I don't want to say that I haven't seen everything, even though I've written all these books and stuff. I'm the first to tell you, I'm learning every day. Don't get me wrong. But there's also, what I'm saying is, there's a self-confidence in knowing when you're good at something, whatever it happens to be. You know it because it's what you like. It's what you're passionate about. If you like it and you're passionate about it, the chances are that people are going to notice that, because they see how you react when it comes to certain things. Um, that's kind of what I like. People. I like doing the people things. Now, you'd be surprised. The book on 101 tough conversations to have with employees, that's not because I love people. That's because I'm trying to help people, but I'm also trying to protect the company. Then there was a book called 101 Sample Write-ups for documenting employee performance problems. You have to know how to protect the company. You have to know how to document if you're going to terminate. I mean, that's an important part. Then I wrote a book called Leadership Offense and another book called Leadership Defense, using the sports metaphors.
Mm.
Offense is growing your people, motivating them and coaching them. But the defense is the tough conversations and the documentation and knowing how to structure terminations. It's a carrot and a stick. You have to have both. Then I wrote about something I was passionate about, workplace ethics. And it's the subtitle on workplace ethics is Mastering Ethical Leadership and Sustaining a Moral Workplace. Why did I write that? Because I know Gen Y and Gen Z want to work for an ethical employer. So it's like, how do you build that into your culture and how do you set those expectations? My answer is, you got to start with the management. Because if you train all the employees at the same time, the employees are going to say, Paul, this sounds great, but no one's ever told my manager because he doesn't do this. So you got to make sure your management team is aligned. They're actually doing it, and then you can teach the staff. It's that kind of thing. Um, but the point is, just be honest with yourself. What naturally interests you? When I was a kid, I used to make model ships, model battleships, model aircraft carriers. I liked making ships with my hands. Starting with a clean piece of paper, a little bit of glue, and a little bit of paint, I was in heaven. It's the same thing I do now, except now it's books. But it's the same type of thing. I start with a clean piece of paper, a clean slate, and from there you can grow and build and create. It's a beautiful feeling. So I've been so lucky that what's really my hobby all these years has also been a profitable thing for me. It's like, I like to write about the situations I see in the workplace, and Lord knows every company goes through the same challenges. So I've been lucky that the two kind of came together in harmony. It doesn't always happen that way. But if you like building cars and you're working as an accountant, it's okay to keep them separate too. Be good at your day job and thrive at what you do for fun. But don't give up yourself in the process. To take a job that you honestly don't like, or working for people that you don't trust, that's only going to last so long, and you're going to wear yourself out in the process. And you can't give away that sense of self-respect. I've seen too many times when that's happened. It's safe and okay to actually leave a company. Some people will stay with their company no matter how miserable they are. Don't do that. If COVID taught us anything, it's that life is too short. I'm not saying there's a perfect job and a perfect company and a perfect boss, but I can also tell you, if your spidey sense is telling you, or the hair goes up on the back of your neck, where you're saying ethically, I don't think I can work for this organization anymore. I don't think it's healthy. The word you hear most often is toxic. It's a toxic work environment. Then you know what? Move on. Find a job, give notice, and move. Don't stay anchored, because a lot of times it's almost like people who are in abusive relationships can't leave them. It's kind of that same human need that, yeah, it's horrible here, but it could be worse elsewhere. I don't agree with that. If it's horrible here, that's a full stop. It's horrible here. Stay with that. Now just think, what can your future look like that's different than this? And don't automatically say it can get worse out there. Yeah, I know it could get worse, but you can leave that too. This is at-will employment. You're not under an employment contract that says you have to stay here for 5 years. So be kind to yourself. It all starts with you. That career introspection that I started off with is so important, because again, people bounce through life in their careers like a cork on the wave, not really thinking about where they want to go. What I'm looking for as an interviewer is, I want to test that level of career introspection. I don't care if you're going to be licking stamps for my company. I want to make sure that you're doing it deliberately and purposely, and that you see a broader picture. That's really important to me, and it's important to most employers. I'd be surprised if there aren't many out there that are saying that they don't care about that. They do. So to the degree that you feel comfortable building that muscle, right? This is a muscle. The self-awareness is a muscle. They call it emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is one of the top 5 things that CEOs are looking for in the global CEO surveys that I'm seeing these days, right? They want collaboration, they want innovation, they want accountability, but they really, really, really want emotional intelligence in their leaders and in their employees. It's definitely worth putting time into building that muscle and becoming stronger at that. And it all starts with you. Then the rule becomes the universe knows that you can't give away anything that you don't already have. So give it away. Teach what you choose to learn. Be that gift that keeps paying it forward and touch people's lives in a positive way. It rigs, it pays back so many ways in the workplace and in your personal life. Karma is real, right? What emanates from you returns to you. Just look at it that way. There's so much noise in the world. There's so much craziness going on. We're losing ourselves in the process. I think, again, management has the opportunity to bring people around the campfire and share the wisdom. But even if you don't have that in your business world or your personal life, you've got to give it to yourself. You've got to make the space and make the time to do that. It's more important now than ever. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's good stuff as well. So, all right, so you're figuring all this out as you're going through the various companies that you worked for, and you've decided that it's time to make the leap into consulting. What is that situation like for you? How long did it take? You said that you always wanted to do that, but how long in like maybe the year or 2 years leading up to it was there one moment where you're like, okay, now it's time, or was there a prep time where it's like, all right, a year out, got a year left at this company, and we're preparing to make the leap. How did that transition work? What was the moment like, and how was the launch of the consulting? Obviously, or not obviously to me because I know it, but maybe not to everybody else. People always say that your first customer is the hardest one to get. So how was that all of that transition from yep, it's time to first customer?
Again, excellent question. Okay, so here's a scoop. It's a little bit of both for me. So I was the CHRO, the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Motion Picture and Television Fund, which is an organization in Woodland Hills, California, kind of half hour, 45 minutes from Hollywood. But it's the retirement home for the entertainment industry. So think independent and assisted living, skilled nursing, long-term care, memory care, behavioral psychiatry. This is everyone knows it as the place where the people in the entertainment industry go when they retire. A lot of people do. Okay, so the bottom line was when COVID was first discovered in this country, it was discovered in a retirement home up in Seattle.
Hmm.
And the logic was, these people, because of their elder years, they are more susceptible, they're more prone to disease. Going through COVID in that organization in the year 2020 was really tough. We went through everything as like COVID at ground zero when you're leading a retirement home because of the vulnerability of the population. We lost employees, we lost residents, we lost patients. Tough times. We had the National Guard on campus to help us because we ran out of nurses and we ran out of physician's assistants. They were sending their people in to help us. We found out on a Friday afternoon that LA Unified was not opening on Monday morning because of the pandemic, which meant, OMG, we got to create a childcare center because the nurses aren't going to come to work if their kids are at home. So we've got to have K through 12. Where are we going to put it? What are we going to do? My wife was a retired teacher. Guess what? She came in and she volunteered to teach. But it was such a scattering, especially in 2020. And the reality was going through 2021 was also tough. Things started to get better in 2022. By the summer of 2022, we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. I had given 4 months notice, found and trained my replacement, no drama, good handoff. So we were okay. But truthfully, I was part of that gray resignation. I was like, you know what? Life is too short. I know what I love doing. And what I love doing is teaching. And what I love doing is podcasts. And I love doing interviews. And I love doing keynote speeches. And I love doing coaching. I just want to do that. And because I had the advantage of having a really strong network because of my writing over the years or my teaching over the years, a lot of people knew me. So I went in a very transitioned, a sheltered transition type of way where I wasn't starting from scratch. And most entrepreneurs do have to start from scratch. So I respect that. My case was a little bit different. But again, what I'll say, Eric, is I was still frightened to death because when you're used to having a regular paycheck and regular benefits and you just drop off a cliff, it's like, whoa, what am I doing? Wait, should I go get another job? Was it a mistake? Truthfully, in my experience, it was never a moment where I regretted it. It was the right move for the right thing, for the right reason. One of the things I was thinking was timing. We're coming out of COVID. It's been 2 to 3 years now where people have been treading water. Companies have been treading water. They're lucky to still be afloat, but companies are going to want to do things for their employees. They're going to want to train their managers. They're going to reinvent the culture. They're still going through all this stuff with remote. They're going to want to bring people back or find a hybrid balance where there's better. To me, there were a lot of opportunities, and I thought the timing would work out well. And knock on wood, I was right. The need for management training has probably never been higher. And this idea of managing remote is something that it's too new to even teach. We don't even have, really much out there in terms of literature or management canon. It's not out there. So I could fill the gap. I can fill that need. And so that worked well for me. I have to say, knock on wood, I have not looked back once. I couldn't be happier. I'm really at a point in my career where this is pretty much the pinnacle of it all. I don't have one period at all. Maybe working for Nickelodeon. I loved working for Nickelodeon. That was only 2 years of my life. I got laid off in 2008 when the market fell apart. They
Yeah.
laid off like 12,000 people from Viacom. I got caught up in that. I would have stayed there forever. But that happens. You got to be light on your feet. The truth of the matter is, when I got laid off, I usually found a job that was either a higher title or more money than my last one. So I was lucky with that. But always think strategically about how to build your career. Think 3 to 5 years out. If you were to accept this job now, how could you explain it to a prospective employer 3 to 5 years from now? If it's a matter of treading water, if changing jobs is like changing hats and you're not really adding more responsibility, more money, or bigger titles, or bigger budgets, or bigger, it's not necessarily in your best interest to make that move unless you're facing a toxic environment that you really need to get out of for health reasons. But be strategic about how you're building your career. People will know about that when you're interviewing, when you start telling them about what your considerations were, what your narrative is, what brings you to them today. Bingo, they're going to know right away whether you're that cork on the wave or you're more deliberate and strategic in how you think.
Yeah. So okay, so you said you had a book that came out a few weeks ago. Um, Obviously you'd been writing all the way up until this point, but what was the idea for the new book? What's it called? Where can people go find it? Yeah.
The one that's probably most relevant for your audience is the 101 Tough Conversations to Have with Your Employees. But here's a quick story. So there was a book called The First Time Manager, which has been around since the 1980s, still ranks as the number one book in its class. It sold 500,000 copies. And the publisher, HarperCollins, said, Paul, we want to build out an umbrella underneath that book. It can be first time manager HR, first time manager sales. Could you write the HR book? And I said, I'd love to. It'll be the first book I've ever written for an HR audience. Because the funny thing for me is, even though I've been in HR all these years, Eric, all my books were written for a general management audience, right? Tough Conversations to Have with Your Employees isn't an HR book, it's a management book. Well, the same for all my other books. But this one was going to be dedicated strictly to an HR audience. So I said, yes, I'll do it. And it just came out 2 weeks ago. And they said, but wait, before you do that one, can you write another book under the series that can pair with all the other books? Like you pick up the first time manager sales, but oh, look at this one. I think I want this one too. Could you think about that? And I said, I don't have to think about that. I got it. And they said, what? And I said, first time manager leading through crisis. Everything is about crisis and disruption at this point in our lives. And it's like the crises are with the people on your team individually, with the team or department itself, with the company, or basically with broader society. How do we deal with pandemics? How do you deal with unions? And I have nothing against unions, just so I'm clear. But as an employer, you don't want to go union if you don't have to. That makes more sense. Unions are having a comeback. In general, I think that's a good thing. I think that's needed. But the bottom line is, as an employer, you still don't want your company to go union if you can avoid it. But since they're getting so much traction, are you training your managers on what to do if companies are thinking about, if their employees are thinking about going union? That's a crisis. What about mergers and acquisitions? Uh-oh, my company's going to be bought. What do I do? Should I get my resume out there? All of those things are real today because mergers and acquisitions are spiking through the roof. How do you deal with that stuff? And who are you? And who do you choose to be? And how do you want to influence the people who you support, the ones you shepherd, the ones you manage. So that's what that book was about. So that one came out in September, and then the new one came out in May, but both part of that First Time Manager series. So it's
Very
cool.
nice. And where can the people can find them on Amazon or wherever?
Barnes and Noble, wherever you happen to shop for fine books, fine bookstores everywhere. All my books are available that way.
Gotcha. I feel like this is a good place to wrap it up. There's loads more questions that I'd love to ask you, but I feel like if we start going, we'll go down another rabbit hole and we'll be here for forever. Um, do you have any last nickels before we get you out of here?
No, I want to compliment you on your interviewing skills because you're
Thank
really
you.
excellent at this. Good for you. I think it's great, Eric. It's good to see someone doing this. I'm going to say one more thing. Gen Z, the Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, continually test out as the most lonely, isolated, depressed generation on the planet. I'm not ending this on a negative note. I want to end it on a positive note. But there's a reason for that. They're the first truly digital generation. And because everything, it used to be that when I was a kid, if you wanted to call your friend at your friend's house, they only had one phone. And you'd call, and the parent would pick up the phone. And you would say, "Hello, Mrs. Sweeney. How are you tonight, ma'am?" "Oh, fine, Paul. How's your family?" Blah, 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 blah. Right? And you'd have that conversation. "Is Michael available? I'd like to talk to him, please." "Yes, sure, Paul. I'll get him for you." Okay, that turned into cell phones, which went phone call to phone call, carved out the parents altogether. Then the next iteration was it wasn't really a cell phone used as a phone. It was a cell phone used for texting and IMing, but they weren't talking to each other. On top of that, now you put a 2-year pandemic in place, 3-year pandemic, however you look at it. But people who missed out on their high school years or their college years, you guys, this has been really, really tough on you. Part of it is not your fault. The digital is just the digital. I understand that, but the pandemic made it worse. You need to go to the 30,000-foot view. Get out of the weeds. I know we live in the weeds, but from time to time, when I talk about career introspection, what I'm talking about is taking yourself up to that 30,000-foot view and looking down. See objectively what's going on out there. Understand that if you can see it dispassionately, if you can see it objectively, you can see better. You can feel better about it. You can understand it. You're almost separating yourself from the issues. You can also look forward and see a lot more clear at 30,000 foot than you can when you're in the weeds. When you come back down to the weeds, which is where we all live every day, you can understand why it's gotten to where it is, and then you can find those solutions. The best solution I can ever tell you is give it away. If you can give away peace of mind, if you can give away a sense of inclusion and belonging, if you can give away a sense of welcomeness, like I say, the universe is a boomerang, right? What emanates from you returns to you. It will come back to you in spades. But it's not often that I get a chance to talk to primarily Gen Zers. My respect for you guys is tremendous. I think you are going to change the world for all the right reasons. But understand that these are particularly hard times. Your parents can't relate to this. We didn't go through pandemics. We're also not a digital generation. When I started in the workplace, when that first job I had in sales, we didn't have computers. We had little index cards and yellow pages. The only thing I had electronic was a telephone. That was 30 years ago. That's not that long ago. My lifetime has seen, and I'm talking 30 years, the introduction of computers, the introduction of the internet, and now the introduction of AI in 3 decades. It's phenomenal what's gone on out there. But understand something, everyone's still trying to figure out the plane while we're flying it. So don't put too much pressure on yourself. Be easy on yourself, but understand something, you've got a lot to give. The giving, you can't give away anything you don't already have. That's the universe's rule. So give it away. Even if you don't feel like you always have it, doesn't matter. Fake it. Give it away anyway. Make people feel comfortable when they're interviewing you. Make people feel comfortable when they're partnering with you and getting to meet with you. You don't know what other people's moccasins are like, what miles they've walked in their moccasins. Don't judge. Don't be judged. Let every soul walk its path, but make sure that you're there to make other people's lives better. You follow that one simple rule, bring out the best in your coworkers, always have people's backs. It will return to you over and over and over again. You will be one of the most popular kids on the block, and you're going to be moving into management because people are going to sense that energy. Yes, your generation has had particular challenges, probably not seen since the Great Generation, when they grew up in the Depression and they were forced to fight World War II. That was a really, really tough gen. Your gen is having it tough too, though. And that lack of socialization is something that you need to purposely overcome. And that's by reaching out. and making sure you make those connections. So whether you're in leadership or an individual contributor role, to the degree that you can, give away what you choose to receive, right? Teach what you choose to learn. That will come back to you in spades. So that's my
Yeah,
ending
that's
piece.
great advice. A great way to wrap it up. Last but not least, where if the people are interested in learning more about you, finding your books or any talks or anything that you've done, where can they go find that?
My website, great question. It's just paulfalconehr.com. So easy enough. The HR is for human resources, obviously. So paulfalconehr.com, and they will have everything they will ever want to know about me, Eric, in multiple versions. So the videos and everything else is all there.
Sounds great. That link and the link to the Business Bureau statistics
Right.
will be in the description below. Um, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Eric.